Have you ever gone on the net, looked up whatever was wrong with you that day and found out that you have Ebola? Or, you're a guy and you look it up and you have all the symptoms of being pregnant? Welcome to the world of internet-based self-diagnosis. One of the rules that is supposed to be followed by the medical system, but lawsuits happen, is that you literally tell the patient, you're not qualified to diagnose yourself any more than I am, because no one can diagnose themselves because they have a conflict of interest. You might steer yourself towards a conclusion that makes it to where things are cheaper, rationalizing all the way, or decide that you're dying from something when you're not. None of these are valid because they're not based on facts. Electrosmog, that's the title of the video, and EMF, and all the other words I can stick into it. Well, I was diagnosed by a professional. Are they selling the treatment? Yes. Does Big Pharma get blamed for diagnosing you with everything under the sun and making you take pills because they have a conflict of interest? Yes, but you won't blame somebody who tells you what you want to hear and charges you a bunch of money for literally rose water treatments for electromagnetic exposure. How are you any different than a radio receiver if you claim to be sensitive? You're not allowed to say you're different. If you're claiming you're radio sensitive, a radio can be tuned to the wrong frequency. A radio can just simply be bad, broken, not work. And humans have shown no real sign of real electromagnetic sensitivities beyond a very narrow range of weird things that happen. I'm going to list them. Due to chemical imbalance, nerve damage, or genetics, some people sometimes, very rarely, have literally one or two nerves that they can detect in their body or in the brain that have a reaction to radio signals. This does happen. Statistically, it should happen. I'm not saying, it's like me saying, I don't believe in a God in your religion. I'm an atheist. That doesn't mean there is no God. It just means that you'd have to show some sort of real proof of it, which probably is impossible, honestly. Maybe an impossible task I'm giving you. But at least I have to rationally acknowledge that I'm not saying there can't be a God. That doesn't make any damn sense. I'm just saying the one that's depicted by religions isn't possible because of its self-contradictory nature and having all of these abilities that make it to where effectively it's crippled. That sounds a little bit weird, but it's a philosophical kind of argument with it. The same thing goes with radio detection. If you're detecting radio signals, there's a conundrum you're going to have to deal with. If you're detecting radio signals, if you claim a radio is detecting a radio signal, which is what it's supposed to do, it has to be tuned to a certain frequency to detect it at all. Otherwise, it's noise. Noise has a sort of statistical averaging effect, where no matter where you tune, if you tune a non-tuning radio receiver, that actually is a thing. It takes an entire band, wide band, and makes it into noise you can hear or visual stuff on the screen. It doesn't give you any useful information, and more importantly, any place that there is a signal will just get kind of blended out and not really do anything. That's how humans behave as a radio receiver in theory and in practice. If you're claiming you're electrosensitive, it must mean you're either picking up a specific frequency, or you're just simply sensitive to certain frequencies, or somehow some part of you, a discrete part of you, is sensitive to radio signals. No, you're not body electric. No, it's not the electric universe. None of this bullshit actually flies, because then radio signals wouldn't work the way they do. Period, full stop. And this is actually where the, rubber meets the road, or the meter hits the soldering iron. If you claim to be electrosensitive, electromagnetically sensitive, or radio sensitive, or any other wording you want to use, you have to prove that you are, because it's an extraordinary claim. This is not done by having someone tell you you're right all along, no one can ever argue with you, and I'll sign a piece of paper so you can sue somebody because you don't like them. If you get a doctor who specializes in lawsuits, I don't think that's a doctor. I think that's a professional witness, don't you? He or she has all of these testimonials. He helped me. Yeah, it's called psychiatric help. Most of these people just tell you what you want to hear. There's nothing wrong with placebo effect, but it's still placebo effect. And yes, I'm saying this. Psychology, psychiatry, most of it is placebo effect. Placebo effect is you being tricked or tricking yourself into making yourself better. That's not a bad thing. That's actually very useful. Even if acupuncture is basically placebo effect, if it works, I don't care. It still works. all you're doing is getting your body to fix itself. Same thing with the brain, same thing with emotions, same thing with psychology, psychiatry, even philosophy, even religion. There's nothing wrong with it, but when you take it outside of what it really is and become a zealot, there's something wrong. And that also goes with the aha thing. I'm a conspiracy theory researcher. I know more than everybody. Aha. No, I don't. Neither do you. We're only exposed to what we are. We have this zeticism thing going on where, yeah, we're really only able to really evaluate what we can detect and deal with and experience in reality. We extend our senses, because our senses are blitheringly stupid, into ranges that we don't have the ability to detect in. A very good example of this is literally the radio frequency spectrum. We use pieces of equipment called radio receivers to detect radio signals. I'm going to be doing a video series on how to build a full spectrum radio signal strength meter. All it does is pick up radio signals, measure how intense they are and what frequency they are, and make a log of it on a memory chip. Because a bunch of you don't have access to it. There is a cheap way of doing it. Yes, it's looking up in Radio Electronics and DigiKey and a bunch of other websites and backup copies of them, because most of them are gone now, the part numbers to build a piece of equipment that has a group of antennas and also a snowflake antenna that's sensitive to all sorts of frequencies, that just records how strong the signals are. And you can tell it to do it for a very long time for a good solid sample and across the entire spectrum. It'll just take you a short scan's an hour. A real one is a week. You got to leave it plugged in. It needs a battery backup, because I don't trust anything that isn't battery backed up. And you actually find out whether or not you're really being exposed to signals. First step, are you being exposed to signals? Second step, you expose yourself to signals and see if you can detect them at random. You can build a piece of equipment that does that. It just makes radio signals at about 1 milliwatt, really close to you. You want to keep the wattage as low as possible. If you're not sensitive enough to pick up a radio signal that you would be able to use on a cell phone or on a walkie-talkie, you're not sensitive. And it would have to do the entire frequency spectrum very slowly. You'd have to sit there for at least an hour to see if you can detect anything within band. Anyway, medical conditions and other conditions that can cause some sort of reaction like this. Any metal or non-metal, sometimes, objects in the body that get stuck sometimes can react in some weird way that is not really well documented, to make it to where if they're exposed to radio signals, you can detect it. Now, the detection I'm using is very vague. If you have certain forms of silica glass get stuck under your skin from a bicycle wreck, it might react to really, really intense radio signals by accidentally rectifying it to where you feel a slight change in sensation, pressure, pain, whatever. You can have radio mouth. This is where the mineral, I don't even know how radio mouth works. Basically, if you have fillings and sometimes not, same thing. All sorts of crap like that. Bits of iron magnetite. Yeah, iron-based magnetite from sand, from beach. Get into people's ears, they get near a power line, they can hear a humming noise. It's because the little bit of metal, the little bit of iron in it happens to be a magnetically polarized bit of metal. It's black sand, magnetite. By the way, magnetite's quite useful for filtering water supplies, if you didn't know that. But anyway, that's the hairy stuff you find on the magnet if you drag it in the sand out there. And some people have reported being able to hear a humming noise until they cleaned out their ears and realized, oh, it must have been the sand that got in there. Weird crap like that. I mean, bizarre, weird stuff that, in most cases, have a clear explanation. Then we get on to the weird, really weird stuff. Electrical damage by being hit with an electrical current, or electrocuted, and resuscitated, twice in my case. Sometimes you end up with a nerve ending that's damaged, but for some reason picks up some stupid radio signal, or more accurately, a magnetic or electrical charge. You can also become sensitive to that. You can also become insensitive to that. If someone makes a claim that they can pick up a radio signal because they can feel it, you test it. You don't trust it. It's a fantastical claim, and it's something most people would want to get rid of. Instead, you run into a typical activist behavior. I'm special. I can detect something you can't, and therefore, because I'm a minority in the population, I demand that you all change your entire way of life so that I am not annoyed. And I refuse to test to see if I'm full of it because I'm special. Yes, that is literally the mic drop. If someone claims to be able to hear ultrasonic or infrasonic, they have to prove it. You can test it. It's not that difficult. Same thing with light frequencies. I can barely detect ultraviolet, barely detect some of the infrared light, because everybody has a pretty good chance of being able to detect those light frequencies slightly. Again, you use a low intensity. Don't hit yourself with 100 watts ultraviolet through the eyeball, okay? Just saying. If someone makes a claim that they have diabetes, and I want diabetes treatment, wouldn't it be rational to really test if they have diabetes instead of trusting a self-diagnosis? Or worse, one that was done over the internet, and then treat them for diabetes and have them die from something totally unrelated? This is the reason self-diagnosis of electromagnetic field sensitivity, magnetic sensitivity, radio sensitivity, whatever wording you want to use, requires that you acknowledge no one has to believe you, and everyone should tell you that you're deluded until you prove otherwise. There are maybe a handful of people, I'm not kidding, maybe 6 or 7 people on Earth who've shown electromagnetic sensitivity that can be tested and confirmed. But it's inconsistent, it comes and goes. Then shouldn't you be relying on making it go away instead of telling everybody that they can't have cell phones when none of them are sensitive to this? They don't know they're sensitive. Now you're really walking back this shit. Now you're worrying about, oh no, the majority of people don't have this problem, but I'm telling them to change something for me, but I'm doing it for them. No, you're not. You're doing it because you gain power by doing this mythology. The reasoning behind this is not a reasoned behavior. If I claimed that I could hear the noise on the back of a computer screen at 15 kHz, and I wanted everybody to take all of their computer monitors and fix them so that I didn't have to hear it, I would be considered crazy, but I could. I was in my 30s and I could still hear that stupid high frequency whine. It was annoying, and I had a job repairing them. The reason I was sensitive to it wasn't just that I was sensitive, it's that I was hearing it all day, working at a place, realigning computer monitors, which, if you don't know about this, is really not fun. These were the old CRT monitors. Getting something picture perfect, literally, so that someone could put extremely fine text on a screen instead of just switching over to LCD screens, was what I did. And this is what drove me batshit insane about these noises. I was oversensitive to them. And then one time a guy's like, I'm going to prove you're not sensitive. So he turns on a monitor. And he's like, you're reacting to it. I don't have a signal up. It's like, dude, it's a high voltage signal on the thing. It's doing it. No, it isn't. Okay, I can prove it's doing it. Leave it exactly like that. And don't turn it off. And don't put a signal up. And it was showing no signal. And then I brought in a audio frequency divider. It takes high frequencies and turns them to low frequencies. And there it was, 15,750 cycles per second, or thereabouts. It's the medium frequency. They all have different ones, but that's the main one to look for. It's called flyback frequency for a reason. It's used by the high voltage coil. It's noisy. And he's like, oh, and I'm like, yeah, I'm sensitive to it. What of it? Well, I couldn't hear it. Just because you can't detect something doesn't mean other people can, or can't. Excuse me. But I was able to prove it to somebody who had a good reason, because most normal people can't hear this shit. And I'm thankful that I don't have to hear it anymore, and I probably can't hear it anymore. I hope I can't. And I can also hear ultra low frequency. I'm a audio frequency sensitive person because I can hear or feel really low frequency and really high frequency. But the thing about it that bothers me is I need to find out where it's coming from because it's driving me up the walls. I know for a fact that there's a machine over there. It's an air conditioning system. I tracked it down one day that puts off really low rumbling noises at lower than 20 cycles per second. Normally you can't hear it. I can. I have to put up with that still. But that doesn't mean I get to tell them you have to turn off your air conditioner or you can't run a dam 2 miles away where I grew up. I'm okay. And that doesn't mean you get to tell everybody that Wi-Fi and 5G is a giant conspiracy to make you miserable because you claim to be sensitive to something you avoid proving you're sensitive to when the majority of people don't get affected by it. Yes, we should accommodate for it if you're sensitive to it. That means you put up metal screening or you move away from it, or we find a way to mitigate it. I like that last option more than anything because if it bugs any one of you, that's bad. I'm not kidding. But you have to prove it first. And all I see are people lying and doing appeals to emotion. Not in my world. Thanks for watching. Have a good day. Good luck with that. Bye.